everybody. Welcome to the debate. My name is Hugh Riley. I am founder of ThatChannel.com and the host of Liquid Lunch here on that channel. And this past week we had one of the candidates for the federal by-election in Toronto Centre on the show, Baman Yaz Danfar. And during that conversation, we discovered that though there were some debates being held in the riding, many of the candidates weren't allowed to participate in the debates. And so in the interests of democracy and in the interests of the constituents of Toronto Centre riding, we at that channel decided to have a debate tonight and invite all the candidates, or invite 6 candidates in the riding. Dorian Baxter from the Progressive Canadian Party, John Deverell from the Green Party, Chrystia Freeland from the Liberal Party, Linda McQuaig from the New Democratic Party, Jeff Pollock of the Conservative Party, and Baman Yaz Danfar, independent candidate. We invited them to this debate, which is being live streamed from our studio here in Toronto, and that no audience will be allowed in the studio. In fact, the email, we sent an invitation to all 6 candidates and said that the debate would be live streamed from our studio. No audience will be allowed in the studio. Please confirm your attendance by Friday, November 22nd. Mr. Dorian Baxter of the Progressive Canadian Party and Mr. Baman Yaz Danfar, the independent candidate, are here in the studio tonight. We have not received any reply from Mr. Jeff Pollock of the Conservative Party. We received the following email from Sonia Lawley from Mr. John Deverell of the Green Party campaign office saying our schedule will not permit us to attend. We received the following email from Mr. Chad Walsh from Chrystia Freeland of the Liberal Party campaign office. Quote, thanks for the invitation to participate in the debate. Currently, we have a scheduling conflict that will not allow us to attend. Is this the only time that you're proposing? Please do let me know if other candidates are proposing other times so that we can see if that would work. And we got a nice phone call from their office as well. We received the following email from Mr. Kiavash, from Linda McQuaig's NDP, to Mr. Kiavash in our office, which has been forwarded to us saying, or addressing Kiavash saying, I take it we're not going to participate in this one. Fine by me. It sounds like a vehicle for getting the independent candidate into serious debate, which is a great idea, and that's why we're doing it here tonight. We also received a pleasant voice message from Mr. Kiavash. So, here we are. We have 2 of the candidates from Toronto Centre, and we have John Richardson to moderate this debate. Mr. Richardson has been an active member of the community and has moderated other debates and other events. So we're happy to have John joining us here tonight to moderate this event. And so, John, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we look forward to this fabulous opportunity.
Well, thanks very much, Hugh. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to just have to moderate and not have any part of the organization. Okay, well, wow. Listening to those introductions, I'd have to say that the story of this debate, of this by-election in Toronto Centre so far has been more about, well, the by-election than the issues themselves. What's your experience been in participating in debates so far?
Who would you like to speak first on that?
Well, we have the 2 of you here, so I think we don't have to be overly rigid with the rules.
Let me let Baman go
okay.
First, and that'll be great.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Hugh. So far, what I am facing is not being able to meet and expose my ideas, my visions, and the constituents' sayings to the public. Most of my times in the last 4 or 5 weeks is spent trying to get into the debates rather than spending more time with the constituents in Toronto Centre. And the reason for that, I believe, as you heard Hugh was reading the replies, apparently either they are concerned about getting into the serious conversation with us, or they don't find us serious enough to converse with us. Whatever the reason might be, my question is, why we bother to go through the process of the election if media and the public just chose to accept 4 candidates from 4 mainstream parties?
I think that Barman makes a very good point, and I think that Mr. Richardson would probably lay the blame at the feet of the organizers of the debates, because these people are aware of the fact we live in a democracy. They are aware of the fact, and we just celebrated recently, I presided over a half a dozen, if not more, Remembrance Day services, and the Allied forces, and our veterans in particular, fought for democracy. And we in Canada presently do have what is referred to as the Westminster model of parliamentary democracy. And my concern, and I'm hoping there are a number of people listening, is to echo what Barman has said, that for some reason the organizers of these debates have seen fit to exclude over 65% of the candidates, 11 candidates fully registered, and each one of us paid our $1,000, collected over 100 legitimate signatures of people from Toronto Centre, and yet somehow the people organizing the debates have seen fit to exclude 7 of us. The one debate, the University of Toronto debate, where they did involve everybody, unfortunately was commandeered by, I believe it was a Kevin Clark, who actually was raising his concern that he wanted the same level of, I guess, involvement as the others, and it ended up shutting down the whole debate. So my concern is, and I think Barman, I don't know if I've told you, but I've registered my concern with Elections Canada, and I'm hoping by the time the federal election occurs in 2015, there will be an injunction in place to say that when there is an all-candidates debate, it should include all candidates. So I'm not really blaming the other candidates per se, but I'm blaming the people that have organized the debates for not paying attention to the Westminster model that gives the voters the right to vote and gives the candidates the right to be heard. I think it is, as Barman pointed out, a violation of the democratic principles when there is a form of censorship like this. The people of Toronto Centre are the ones that have been robbed of the democratic principles to hear every candidate. And of course, the Westminster model makes it clear that it isn't the party that counts. It's the individual, the person. And, we are here to represent the people of Toronto Centre. So that's my 2 cents worth on that as well.
Well, that's really interesting. You close with this what some might regard as an absolutely outlandish notion, given the prevalence of the political parties today, that the job of the candidate is to represent the people. Yes. And, I've sat in on some of the debates, and I've heard the candidates ask the question very specifically. What would they do in the event that their position differed or diverged from their party leader? And I don't believe that I have ever heard a satisfactory answer to that question. Now, Bauman, certainly as an independent candidate, what is your view of the role of the candidate and the role of the MP?
Well, I have written many articles during the last 4 or 5 years. And first of all, I want to mention that the issue of the excluding candidates is not isolated to Toronto Centre. Is what I call it is a disease that goes around the nation, provincially and federally. My view about these candidates that represent the party, as I have written in the past, is they are just acting and behaving as an employees of a corporation. So they follow the rules and guidelines that sets forth for them. And even if any one of them has any merit, he or she he's not allowed to express it. Why? Because there is always a big brother of the party sitting in top or watching from top of their shoulder and see what they do. And for that reason, I believe they are very restricted to exhibit their own real identity. And they, as you notice in last 2-3 debates, mostly I got impression of they are campaigning for their leaders. Constantly for every question they answer, their answer include the name of their leaders.
Now, you know, Dorian, I mean, you're not an independent candidate. You were, in fact, the candidate for the Progressive Canadian Party.
Yes, yes.
You know, just to make that clear before you answer the question, your thoughts on the role of the candidate as opposed to the party.
Well,
and maybe I should ask you, what would be your position if your view of a matter in Toronto Centre differed from your party leader, the Honourable Sinclair Stevens?
Well, I'm very glad that you've asked that question, John. I have to tell you that one of the reasons that I have availed myself to be a candidate for the last 10 years, ever since that fateful day is coming up, the anniversary is coming up, the 10th anniversary of the takeover of the real Progressive Conservative Party by the Harper regime in collaboration with Peter MacKay, who in my view exhibited traitorial behavior that exceeds that of Judas Iscariot, which is quite significant. But just to let you know that one of the reasons I agreed to run for this party, and I'm honored to do so in many elections and will continue to do so until I get elected, is because we are the only federal party, John, at this present time, that really does adhere to the Westminster model of parliamentary democracy. And that says that you, as the representative of your constituency, have the right and have the responsibility to vote according to the dictates of the constituents and how they feel about certain issues. That is the whole democratic process. So I'm grateful to say that our leader, the Honourable Sinclair Stevens, has made it abundantly clear to me as a candidate that if my views differ from his, I am fully at liberty to express those views. My little flyer here, for example, has all of my views in it, and I know it isn't necessarily a party position that half my salary should be returned to fight poverty, but my leader has said, if that's what your desire is, I'll back you to the hilt. And certainly that, I have now documented that. When I get elected, and it will happen sooner or later, I'm trusting it'll be sooner than later, half my salary will go back into the riding to battle poverty. And so to answer the question, yes, indeed, we are the party that does adhere to the principles of the Westminster model of parliamentary democracy. And of course, our main purpose is to stand up for the needs and the concerns of the constituency that we are seeking to represent.
You know, that sounds like an almost radical idea. You know, whenever I hear somebody take an interest in politics, they're always asking, well, what is the position of your party, or what is the party position? But, you know, you said something very, very interesting in conjunction with your view that you should be participating in debate. You said that you'd paid the $1,000, and I know you have to get 100 signatures to get on the ballot. And I wonder if each of you would tell the audience, is it hard? Is it easy? How much work is actually required to even get as far, if you're not a main party candidate, to actually have your name appear on the ballot? Bauman?
Well, I am a very disciplined man when it comes to conduct any task. And as soon as the writ dropped, the first thing I did, I got one of those books from Elections Canada, and for 6 consecutive nights, I spent between 3 to 4 hours knocking on doors. I knocked about 11 to 1,200 doors to collect 110 or 111 signatures.
1,200 doors to collect 100 signatures. And you were
have to
doing this
understand,
yourself.
myself, no one else, and you have to understand, out of this 11 to 1,200 door knocking, so many of them, they didn't answer, and many of them, they look at the people and they didn't open the door. Many of them, they just politely rejected me, and many of them impolitely rejected me. And
How impolitely?
well, you can go as far as your imagination goes. And, but there were people who were concerned. I had very, very concerned citizens. I met very concerned citizens, and they told me, I am conservative, or I am liberal, or I am NDPer, or I am social democrat, however, it's democracy, and I am going to sign it. Those particular part of this constituents were the ones that they were informed. The large number of the constituents are either uninformed about the process or misinformed about the process. And it's not just the collection of the signature, is that there is is lack of fair ground for the candidates. I have to walk for 6 nights that I could use for my campaigning and talking to my constituents, and yet 4 candidates from mainstream parties, they just photocopy the pages of that booklet and give it to their army of volunteers.
So you would say it's much harder for you to get on the ballot.
Of course.
Dorian, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I have to agree with Barman. I was fortunate in that I did have a couple of people that pounded the pavement for me. I got, I think, 56 names, and one of my friends and supporters got me 23, and the other one got me 58. So I had over 130, and I was told that 130 of them were good. So I was very fortunate, and it took me 2 nights to do that, and I had the help of 2 others. But yeah, I have to agree with Barman that it's a difficult thing to do, and it becomes, a little more difficult. And I'm hoping, I understand we have an audience of 2 or 3 million, so I just want to look at the cameras just to let you people know that we appreciate your tuning in tonight. And we're hoping that you will take a look at your ballot and understand that we are here to represent you, the constituents. Certainly, we have been excluded from the mainline debates, and we're hoping that that will change, because it is really a serious aberration and assault upon the democratic process. And whilst I do not blame the other candidates, because they're certainly candidates that have been basically invited in the same way, I'm a little disappointed in the Green Party, because they had a similar problem when they didn't have any seat in Parliament. One of the excuses that has been given by the organizers of the debates that have excluded us is that they're only focusing on those candidates that belong to a party that has at least one representative in Parliament. Now, my argument to that was that Barman here should have been allowed in right away, because there are at least half a dozen independent members of Parliament, and he is an independent. So I think, again, my concern is that the people of Toronto Centre have been denied the democratic process, in as much as we have been denied the opportunity of presenting our platform and our party and our particular concerns, so that they would have more choice. The other thing I would say, and Barman I'm sure would agree with me, is how do they ever expect people to get into Parliament if the people that would vote them in are not able to hear what they've got to say? It's like being a non-entity.
Well, they probably don't expect it. That's
Right.
presumably the point.
Yes, yes.
But let me get your thoughts on this, because there's a number of issues going on here. I mean, the first is clearly what is the absolute, deliberate, and outright exclusion from the debates of everybody except the so-called main 4-party candidates. A second thing that strikes me, and I'd be interested in your comments on this, is that really does, by excluding the majority of candidates, or to put it another way, restricting the debate to a small number of candidates, it does strike me that it allows the organizers and the candidates to absolutely restrict the topics of discussion at the debates. What would be your thoughts on that? Or maybe if you can include the answer to this, how would the debates have unfolded differently, Bauman, had you been there, or if you had been there, Dorian?
Well, I have a point of reference, and I was lucky enough to have the Reverend in that particular debate about a year and a half ago. About 11 candidates were invited. 9 of them showed up, including some of those gentlemen that expressed their lack of inclusion to the debates harshly, and the debate went very smoothly.
I'm sorry, by that you mean the main party candidates were present? Is that what
Yes,
you mean?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
so to be clear, yeah.
Oh, yes. Green Party was there, Liberal Party was there, NDP was there, and the only one was missing was Conservative. And out of those, all 9 candidates were given equal amount of the time with variety of the subject to discuss, which affected the constituents, not about their party's background or about the history of the parties and what they accomplish as a party. It was, the issues were discussed in that particular debate a year and a half ago, which had 9 candidates present, were affecting the constituents rather than the parties.
So your point is that it is possible to run a debate with everybody?
Of course it is possible. Of course it is. Not only is possible, it's even better for those organizers to not give themselves a bad name.
Mm-hmm. Dorian?
Yeah, I think that, Barman, I think you're referring to the by-election to replace Jack Layton, and that was the Toronto Danforth debates, and you know, all 11 candidates were invited, and 9 showed up, and I think it was a wonderful debate. It probably, the Honourable Sinclair Stevens has commented on the fact it was one of the best-run debates he's ever been involved in, and he has been in politics since he was 8 years old, and he is now 86, so you know, there's a lot of experience there. And I think, as Barman pointed out, those individuals that made a big disturbance in these recent debates were there. And the reason they didn't make a big disturbance is they were invited. And they were given the same amount of time as everybody else. And in fact, they had some very interesting points of view and got equal treatment. And as a result, there was no screaming and shouting. No police had to be called. It was a very well-run debate, and everybody. It was an atmosphere, I think, of understanding and appreciation, and everybody, including the main parties that showed up, with the single exception of Mr. Harper's representative. I understand he had been given instructions not to show up, just in case the party got shown up a little bit too much in terms of their policies. So, and that seems to be Mr. Harper's approach, is to dodge and duck, as he's doing presently with the Senate scandal. But I'm grateful to say that we do have a very effective opposition right now in Mr. Mulcair, who is holding the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister's feet to the fire on this.
And I want to add something else. In that particular debate, not only Justin Trudeau was present, but also a number of the high-ranking Liberal parties, as well as 2 large TV channels. But the only problem from the media perspective was, after recording 2 hours each channel about the whole debate, they only showed 30 seconds of the interview with Justin Trudeau.
Even though he wasn't on the ballot?
Even though he was not on the ballot, and the story was about the candidates, not about him. So unlike my friend that he wants to really give a little bit of the leeway to the candidates, I do not personally believe that candidates are not involved in the process of exclusion of other candidates.
Well, you could be right. I mean, I like to give the benefit of the doubt, but I think that the blame, in my view, Barman, should be put squarely at the feet of the organizers, who, especially in this month of November, recognizing that, we remember the sacrifice for the cause of democracy. And, I am quite offended that my voice was not allowed to be heard. And I was grateful, as I say, the organizer for the Rosedale debates at least said to me, Michael Rogers, his name, he said, if you do come down, you can put your signs up, which I did, and you can hand out your flyers, which I did. And he said, I will ask you to stand and be recognized, and I did. And in fact, I remember almost word for word what I was allowed to say. I said, my name is Dorian Baxter. I said, I'm grateful to be the candidate for the Progressive Canadian Party. We are the real Progressive Conservative Party. We're the party of Sir John A. Macdonald. I went on to say we are the Red Tories, and I concluded by saying we are looking forward to getting rid of Stephen Harper. And there was thunderous applause, and I felt good about that. But I did feel that I would have liked very much indeed to answer the questions and to point out how Mr. Harper's regime is unequivocally the most dictatorial regime ever to blight the political stage federally in Canada.
Well, that's quite a statement. Who knows? History will tell. Dorian, you use I believe, the phrase "dodge and duck" when it comes to these debates, and it strikes me that there are a number of issues going on. I mean, the one is the clear exclusion of. The simple fact is the majority of candidates from participation in the debates, but there's a second issue, and that is. There were 6 candidates invited here tonight, including the so-called 4 mainstream parties, yet only the 2 of you are here. Do you think that, you suggest all candidates should have a right to participate in debates? What about an obligation to participate in debates that one is invited to? What are your thoughts on that, Bauman?
Well, the miscarriage of justice goes to the electorate mainly. If either candidates choose not to show or not being invited. After all, we go to supermarket, we want to buy a cereal for our breakfast, we go to an aisle, we see at least a dozen or 2 dozen of the variety, and we have a choice to choose what we want to eat for our breakfast. And yet when it comes to our decision-making moments, to mark our X on the ballot for someone who makes the decision that affects us directly, we are not given a chance to see what our choices.
It's interesting that, we've started this discussion tonight, and really the main topic has been and continues to be the election itself and the sense of the process. But what I'd be, and I'm sure the viewers would be interested in hearing, you honor. I mean, what do you see as the issues in Toronto Centre anyway? I mean, one of the problems I've had listening to the debates is that I don't think there's much mention in terms of issues. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Justin Trudeau and Mr. Mulcair, but what are the issues? What are the things that really affect the voters of Toronto Centre?
The ones that I spoke with during both my signature collection and campaigning after the fact, as of yesterday, as a matter of fact, is mostly there is no job, the economy is bad, the prices are going high, the rent is unaffordable, the health issue, some families are crambled in a single dwelling, and it caused some sort of the additional hazardous into their health, and lack of amenities available to everyone. So these are the main issues that.
By amenities, you would mean?
I mean either easy access to health care, easy access to for instance, money, to me, money is a form of exchange for good, is a means of the exchange for the good, and everyone has to have enough of it, at least for the basics of the life. If they have to decide between paying, let's say, hydro bill, which is increasing actually every month these days, and choosing a food for their baby or baby formula, and then they have to choose to pay to hydro rather than and keep the baby starved. You tell me what kind of the dilemma you would have.
How can this be going on in a country as rich as Canada? Dorian?
Well, I think that just to dovetail with what Barman has said, I have to concur with every point that he's raised. As I mentioned earlier, I think that all comes under the title of poverty. Poverty is a big issue, and as I mentioned before, on the front of my little flyer, and I had wanted to let this be made known at every debate, that I have vowed that half my salary will come right back into the riding to battle poverty, which is a serious problem in Toronto Centre, particularly the southern area. I'm not talking about Rosedale. There's a lot of money in Rosedale. But I think that the other issues that I, as a candidate, and that my party, as a federal party, have identified, Mr. Stevens' office spent a lot of time preparing for the debates, presuming I would be invited to them. And one of the areas that we were very concerned about is the area of transportation. And we are really surprised to see that the federal government is ignoring the phenomenal rail transit system that we have in place already. Many of these rail lines are left dormant. In the summertime, the grass is growing up over them. They are very intricate, they are very accessible, and we should be using those. Would be a far, far better way to spend money for the people in Toronto Centre than to have Mr. Harper just rubber stamp his fishing buddy, Rob Ford's desire to appease the people in Scarborough. Not that I don't think Scarborough needs to have attention. I certainly think they do. But I think that certainly most people in Scarborough would far rather see a more viable transit system within the city itself than to be just focusing on the extension of a subway line. The other major issue that I never got a chance to address for the people in Toronto Centre is the absolute, what I consider to be crime of the federal government's allowing OSAP and other provincial loans to students to have got out of hand. I mean, we are now looking at $18 billion of debt in Ontario alone for students that are being penalized for being academically capable. And in Europe, students that are in post-secondary and postgraduate education are funded according to the marks they get. With our students, I mean, both my daughters came out of university with huge debts, close to $30,000. And my younger daughter presently has been working, 3 jobs just to pay down her debt. She's got it down to close to $10,000 now, but that's taken years of almost slave labor and many times she has a master's degree, but she is not employed in the area where she should be. She's doing, various jobs that could be done without even a university degree. And so Canada, in my view, federally, is missing the boat. We are crippling the brains of Canada with these huge debts. And I have to say this, at the very least, when I get elected, I will be pushing very, very hard for federal funding for our students so that they'll be in a position where they can move forward and that they will at least have their undergraduate work funded significantly so that they could then move on into postgraduate work. And so those are 2 main areas for me, transportation and the educational realm.
I read something interesting, at least in today's Globe, or at least this is what I think I remember reading, that in the south end of Toronto Centre, the average income is somewhere between $30,000 to $50,000, and in Rosedale, it's over $300,000. Now, if we were to take 300 plus 50, that's 350. If we were to take the average, that'd be 175,000. Does the average actually exist in your view in that riding, or is it just complete polarization? You're either in the south and 30 to 50, or you're in Rosedale, where
I'll let Barman speak to that first.
I am willing to escort anyone who come up with those numbers to areas such as River Street, Oak Street, Parliament, Dundas, Jamestown, and I like to just knock on each door, and these people are very hospitable. Just open the door and go in. And if anyone comes to me and say, these people making 30 or 40 or 50,000 a year, I want to see that on the paper.
you're suggesting you think that's too high?
It's extremely high.
Extremely high. Interesting.
Extremely high. In fact, Dorian mentioned about the poverty, and you brought this issue of the average income. It's very interesting in last 2-3 main debates for the main candidates. NDP candidate and liberal candidate constantly relying on their writings or for their books regarding income disparity and so on and poverty. I gather I just took a liberty to get a couple of the items just for audience to know. First, in 1989, all three parties agreed to eradicate child poverty, which by itself is contradictory. A child cannot be poor without having the parents poor parents, I mean. 24 years later, we have more hungry kids, we have more poor parents, and we have more kids, and we have less social services available to them. Then I thought maybe, well, that is past. We have to focus on the future. I noticed there has been a bill introduced by NDP candidate from Nanaimo, I think it is C233 if I am not mistaken, 2 years ago, to get rid of poverty. The bill is still on the first stage. Now, if NDP party it's so adamant about the poor and just for the poor and low-income families, why they did not pursue their own bills in the House of Commons in the last 2 years? As a matter of fact, I went a little bit further, and I found out Senate, the bills that introduced by Senate, they had more success rate than the bills that introduced in House of Commons. As a matter of fact, I have some numbers here. Senate introduced something about 43 bills in the last 2 years. 16 of them passed, 5 are in the final stages or in the second reading on the House. That means between 33 to 44% success. House introduced about 444 unique bills. In fact, it was 783, but there were duplicates. And so far, they passed only 58, which represent 15%. So my question is, what do these MPs do for the salaries they receive?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, Dorian makes the point that he's going to give half of his back in any case. Dorian, would that partly reflect your view that they're paid at least twice what they're worth?
I beg your pardon, that they would be what?
Your willingness to give half your salary back to the community, would that in part reflect your view that MPs are paid twice what they're worth?
Well, it's partly that. It is partly, as Barman pointed out, the abject poverty that we are seeing today. And, I also remember that vow to eradicate. They all signed on to eradicate child poverty. And here we are 24 years later, and things are worse than they've ever been imagined. I also am the founder of the National Association for Public and Private Accountability and the Canada Court Watch program. Now, the reason I founded those is because I, due to circumstances that erupted in my life back in 1985, I became the first Canadian in the history of this country to successfully sue the Children's Aid Societies of Canada, and I shattered their immunity. Now, the reason I have serious concerns about the welfare of children in terms of poverty dovetails with my concern about the fact that the Children's Aid Societies of Canada, and specifically the Ontario Children's Aid Societies, people don't realize this, but they are privately run organizations. They're funded by the government, but they are private money-making institutions. And what is shocking, I'm now dealing with 4 cases, and I never charge a cent for helping families to get their children back. But it shocks me, Mr. Richardson, to say that in this particular province, in particular, there are files open, because with every file opened, there's over $2,500 given by this government to the Children's Aid that opens that file. And they are kidnapping children that they shouldn't be kidnapping. I'm dealing with one family that recently had to get their children shipped out to another country to save them from being kidnapped by the Children's Aid Society. And now that the parents have done that, the society is trying to accuse the parents of kidnapping the children out of the country. But it was caused by the Children's Aid, who instead of taking an investigatory approach, dropped a nuclear bomb, went for an apprehension order when there was no evidence for that being required. So dovetailing all of that with what Barman said about child poverty, I think the big thing we need today is accountability. In 1972, the average salary of the average member of parliament was $24,000 per annum. Today, it's closer to $190,000. Back in 1972, the stipend was $6,000 per annum. Today, the stipend is over $310,000. It's more than the salary by 1.5 times. So you're looking at every member of parliament now is getting over $500,000 per annum if you add in the salary and the stipend. Not only that, but I would venture to say, if you look at the number of raises Mr. Harper has given to his members of parliament, and there's never been a whimper of complaint by the Liberals or the NDP, and now even the Green Party, about those raises, they take them right away. The Senate scandal has put the spotlight on the Senate, but I would say we need to look at what is happening with the MPs, and that's why I am right now, I'm hoping there's a few MPs watching this, I want to challenge every MP, 308 of them, to give back half their salary to fight poverty. I'm the only one that has suggested I would do that. And the fact of the matter is, we are watching, as Barman pointed out, our young children being raised where their mums and dads have to decide to keep the power on so they won't freeze in the winter instead of feeding them. This is an absolute abomination, and we need to hold the politicians accountable. If they want to show leadership, show it by example. And certainly, in my view, if they would do that, there would be a restoration of confidence in the leadership, whereas today we are seeing a phenomenal deterioration at every level. If it's municipal, we've got clowns like Rob Ford jumping around the place and knocking people over. We've got, on the provincial level, we've got Mr. McGuinty, who's very happily hiding behind all of this stuff that Rob Ford is doing, so that people are no longer holding him accountable as much as they should, or Ms. Wynne, for the phenomenal $3 billion wastage with regard to the power plants. And I don't need to mention again what is going on with the federal government. I mean, I do have a bone to pick with that government, because it is a party that used to be known as the Canadian Reform Alliance Party. They have nothing to do with being progressive conservatives at all. And it was Peter MacKay's betrayal that allowed this party that is currently called and is hiding behind the name of conservative to be conceived in deceit and born in betrayal. Of course, when they were known as the Canadian Reform Alliance Party, it took them 6 months to realize the acronym for that is CRAP. And I would venture to say that we've been getting a lot of that ever since. We do need to take a look at this party that, thanks to Peter MacKay and Stephen Harper and Pierre Elliott Kingsley, the head of Canada Elections at the time, for allowing this to go through. And they were allowed to take over $3 million out of the bank account of the party that was led by Joe Clark. And that's how they've established themselves. So really, they should be referred to as the Pirate Party. in my
Well,
view.
you know, there is a pirate party, and
But these should be the real ones.
I think it's actually worth mentioning that originally, I believe his name was Travis McCrae, who's
Yes,
the leader of the pirate party, was in fact going to run in Toronto Centre, and I'm sorry that he didn't, because it is an interesting party with interesting opinions, and if nothing else, I think an election ought to be about diversity of opinions. But just
Yes.
picking up on you know, the salaries of MPs and that, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. It seems to me that the real value is not so much the salaries, but the incredible pensions.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, Barman, I hope will comment on this too.
Yes.
But, you know, the pensions of those sitting in the Senate, they continue for life at the present salary rate. I mean, it is preposterous. You know, and we've got people battling, as Barman said, to put food on the table.
And these people, of course, in the Senate are appointed.
Yes, yes.
And do you know how many, I believe there's 103 senators in the...
Well, it's about 100, but I think it's about 98 right now. But you said salary, it's a very good point. Instead of we focus on the salaries of the Senate and their pension, why don't we focus on the pension of ordinary Joe, or the pensions of me, you?
Do you have a pension?
It's about, when we get to that level 67 and we go to pension, we are lucky to receive $1,200 a month. So that means we are going to have about 14 to 15,000 with the supplement if they keep the OAC alive. So we are looking at about 17 or 18,000, and yet someone who served one term or two term in House of Commons lives there for the rest of his or her life for about $150 or $160,000 a year.
Yeah, I think you're making a great argument for running for Parliament, is what you're doing.
Yes, it is. This is a disparity that they have to focus, not just disparity between a couple of the corporation and the rest of the public.
Why do you think so few people make an effort to get involved in politics? I mean, I was only half serious when I said the pensions are an incentive. But that aside, why is it that in an election as important as Toronto Centre, or really any other riding in the country, why do you believe so few people make an effort to run? And the second part to the question is, why does nobody vote?
Well, I think that, you know, certainly there is a sense of apathy because of I guess, the lack of caring from the members of Parliament and the members of provincial Parliament. They have a history of caring when there is an election pending. The moment they've been elected, they just seem to disappear into the woodwork. And I think that the other problem comes full circle back, and I think that the media have a lot of responsibility here because, and I hope that members of the media are listening to this, because I believe that the Toronto Star and the National Post have been continuing their coverage as if there were only 4 candidates in Toronto Centre. And more specifically, the National Post in today's paper said that there's really only 2 candidates, and that's the 2 that we've been speaking about, Linda McQuaig and, of course, the Liberal candidate.
Oh, I didn't realize we'd been speaking about them at all.
Well, earlier we did.
We did?
We referred to them briefly.
Okay.
But, and we were talking about the fact they weren't here, you know. So I think that I would hold the media largely responsible for not alerting the Toronto Centre people to the fact there is even a by-election going on. I mean, they basically have limited it and limited the choices. Now, most people that I have met pounding the pavement are shocked to find out that there is another party running because they thought there was only four parties. And they're kind of outraged that they were not given the choice. And I tell them that there were 2 other parties and 3 other independents, 4 independents. And they can't believe that because many of them have said we are more interested in having the person elected that would represent us better than the party. So,
You know, on that point, Dorian, one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating about this, and you hear John Deverell make this point every time I've heard him speak, that he says, you know, there's absolutely nothing at all about the outcome of the election in Toronto Centre that can have any effect on the balance of power in the House of Commons, all right? So, I mean, one would think that if there were ever an opportunity to speak your mind, to identify issues, to really explore options, this would be it. There's
Yes.
nothing whatsoever at stake yet. There seems to be, at least, you know, from my point of view,
yes.
almost no identification of issues other than an acknowledgement that there is tremendous poverty in Toronto Centre. But beyond that, they don't seem to me to be talking about anything.
Well, I know that, and I was pleased to see this at the Rosedale debate, there was a lot of focus upon a national housing project. That, of course, was explained by Linda McQuaig that it was, in fact, Paul Martin that quashed that back in 1995.
Well, maybe that was a good decision in 1995.
Well, it's certainly not a good decision now, and I was pleased to see that the Liberal candidate did say that she has an interest. I mean, there are 165,000 people on the waiting list for housing in Toronto right now, and that is astronomical. I mean, it's just a shocking realization of the derelict approach to duty, not just municipally, but I'm talking about on a federal level, because you can be assured Toronto is not the only city suffering from a housing crisis, and it should be a national, it should be a federal issue. The other concern I've got, and I think Barman touched on it, is healthcare. I'm very, very concerned that this federal government has allowed two-tier health to come in. We pride ourselves in Canada with one system of healthcare. I'm sorry to say the Harper regime has betrayed that. We have all kinds of private healthcare just coming into our system today on a level that is unprecedented. And the one thing the Progressive Canadian Party stands 100% on is the universal health care that has been the badge of this nation ever since it came into being. It is the pearl of great price.
I want to touch on the subject of the Green Party candidate about making difference. He just says half of the sentence. It does not make any difference in the balance of the power between the four mainstream parties in Ottawa who get elected. And he's correct. However, it does make a difference for peoples of Toronto Centre that who will go to Ottawa and defend their rights. Now, if we choose any one of those four people, they are following the status quo. So absolutely, he's right.
They're following a status quo. They're not following anybody except their leader.
A status quo of their own party, of course. And nothing is going to be be changed. However, but if someone like as an independent or just Mr. Dorian from Progressive Canadian Party goes there, we are not bound to any leader to take order blindly and just do what we were told. So we can defend their rights much more effectively than people who are following and being a slave of their own leaders.
You know, Bauman, on that point, I'd be interested in hearing both of you. What I have heard consistently over the years from voters when they talk about independent candidates is, they say, an independent candidate cannot make a difference. They cannot make a difference.
I beg the day.
Yet, based on what you're saying, they are in fact the only candidates who can make a difference. Is that your view?
Of course, and I give you an example. If I become an MP for Toronto Centre and I am in Ottawa, and if there is a vote for any given bill has to pass and needs my vote, I can bargain. I can use it as a leverage to get something back for the Toronto Centre. However, if you have a member from the mainstream party, they don't have any incentive to bargain for you.
Well, I think, I mean, that would seem to me to be the logic behind voting for an independent. Dorian, what's your view on that? I mean, given a choice, I guess, to be very precise on the question, okay, context, potential voter, you're an independent candidate. What difference can you make? Who do you think is more likely to be able to make a difference on the level of the riding itself for the voters? One of the mainstream party candidates or an independent or smaller party candidate?
Well, there's no doubt. The reason I chose to run for the Progressive Canadian Party is because of the very clear policy they've had that an individual elected within the Westminster model of parliamentary democracy is bound first and foremost to the needs and the concerns of his or her constituents. And that's what I love about the Progressive Canadian Party. You can go back to look at all of the documentation around the Progressive Conservative Party, going back to the Sir John A. Macdonald model. In fact, it was Sir John A. that coined the phrase, "We need to be progressive conservatives." And of course, that means we have a left wing, which is socially progressive, and a right wing, which is fiscally conservative. And it would mean that, as to come right back to your question, John, to point out that if it is Barman as an independent or myself as a party candidate with full permission from the leadership to focus first and foremost on the needs of those who elected me, there is absolutely no question that we can be far, far more effective, because we will not. I mean, Lois Brown, who currently is the Member of Parliament for Newmarket Aurora, where I have run several times, is really, along with nearly every member of federal parliament under the Harper regime, is really a shill. And, she will come on when it's her time to speak, and she will say something like, I am the Member of Parliament for Newmarket Aurora, and I am so pleased now to bring Mr. Flaherty forward to speak about this, this, and this. So she literally steals the parliamentary time for the constituents and gives it away freely under the direction of Stephen Harper to bring Mr. Flaherty up, and he can use. So honestly, the people of Toronto Centre are going to be much better served if they elect somebody like Barman or myself or one of the other independent candidates who will stand up for them. And certainly, I would challenge any voice in Parliament to stand up against my voice or Barman's voice. We would be heard, and we would make sure that the constituents that have put their confidence in us would have their needs brought forward in Parliament on a regular basis.
That sounds so logical, it sounds so reasonable, it sounds so consistent with Westminster-style democracy, it sounds like it should be the goal of any democracy, yet that doesn't go on. And I'm wondering if the reason might be that, you got to be elected to get to Parliament, and I'm wondering if the people who vote are disproportionately just supporters of these mainstream parties, and the rest have kind of just given up, thinking their vote doesn't matter.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
I'm sorry.
No,
You
go
or
ahead.
me?
Go ahead.
I think, as Dorian mentioned earlier, the role of the media plays is major factor to this process. Ordinary men and women who get up in the morning, run their way to the job, dealing with the issues of the family, illness, hunger, rent, and so on, do not possibly have enough time to go and study all the factors and the ifs and buts of the politics and how it goes around, and they just rely on the half-an-hour news at the end of the night, or half an hour reading the national paper like Toronto Star or National Post or mainstream media. And whatever they put there, they accept it or they take it as a face value. And because of that, over a period of years, it didn't happen over months, over a period of years, what happened, people just assumed there is 4 parties. On top of that, the changes in the Election Act to include the name of the parties in the ballot.
And that was 1972 or somewhere in that?
72, yes, it was 72. And what they did, they just, as Dorian said, we are in the Westminster parliamentary system. That means one riding, one representative. At the end, for any given issue, they are voting coalitions. And now they put the name and brand of the Liberal, NDP, and so on.
I'm sorry, you're saying that a political party is a voting coalition?
Yeah, it used to be voting coalition, but now political party become completely different entity and took over of the voting process, which is supposed to protect the right of the constituents. And now people under the dilemma. I went to the doors, I knock on doors, I open the doors, which party? They didn't say who you are, what is your name, what you stand for, which party?
Actually, they ask what the platform of your party is. They don't ask what you...
And then, when I mentioned that I am independent, some people said, do we have such a thing as an independent?
My God, that's like asking, do we have such a thing as an MP?
Yeah, I think that Barman raises some very good points, and, you know, it comes full circle. I am grateful to the producers of that channel, Hugh Riley and his staff, for calling this debate. It's an online debate, and, you know, I'm also grateful. I understand from Hugh Riley, the producer, that this will be put on YouTube, and it will be available within the next... I think 15 or 20 hours for people to view, even though they couldn't tune in live. I'll be putting that on my Facebook account just to make sure that people can hear this. And I think, you know, really, the mainstream media has let us down, is continuing to let us down. And we need more and more to tap into this kind of online communication, because I really believe that's where we're going to get to the people. But Barman is right. I mean, most people, most Canadians are so busy surviving financially and in every other way that they don't have time to look beyond what they're presented by the main media. And so, I mean, I'm not surprised that many, many people are shocked to find out that Barman is running, and there are seven of us that are being totally shunned by the main media, and worse still, shunned by the ridings that have banded together to allow... I understand there were 10 different communities that banded together for the Jarvis Street Collegiate debate, which was very well run. There was a lot of people there. But those 10 communities apparently, and I don't know how true this is, got together about a month and a half before the dropping of the writ and said, hey, listen, in the name of democracy, we are only inviting those parties that have at least one member in Parliament.
You don't mean in the name of democracy.
Well,
you mean in the name of monopolizing democracy.
Exactly. I mean, what it boils down to is we're not really living in a democracy. We're living in a moneyocracy.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm not so sure I think it's easy to take that position, but, you know, we've talked tonight here about income inequality, we've talked about poverty, and after listening to the two of you, I mean, it's been great because, I mean, I've always been a believer in independent candidates, and, you know, you've got me excited about that again. But I'm wondering if the most important thing that voters can do to improve their situations would in fact be to get themselves out and vote. I mean, if they don't vote, they're just kind of stuck, you know, with the continuation of all the things that they've had. And, you know, I mean, would you think that a higher percentage of people in Rosedale vote than in St. Jamestown or Regent Park?
Well, in fact, it was said by one of the candidates that the poor people don't vote. They just don't. I mean, I would beg to differ there, because I know a number of poor people that are voting for me, They've already told me they're going to vote for me. Some have already done so in the early election. But I think what it boils down to is, thank goodness, at least Elections Canada has put our names on the ballot. That's one thing that we have going for. Our names are there. But most people will look at those names and say, well, who are these? Because they will not have heard, until they go to put their pen on the ballot, they will not have been aware that there were 7 more worthy candidates that were ready to serve them, and they have been denied the democratic right of choice. There's been a censoring of 7 of us, which should never, ever have been. The veterans who died in Flanders Fields, those in the Second World War, the Korean War, right up to the present situation, will not be happy to know that the price they have paid has been so spurned. And in my view, the graves of those veterans are being trampled on by the media and by those organizing these debates, not allowing the constituents to know who is running in this by-election is a serious assault upon the democratic principles upon which this country is founded and for which our veterans fought.
You know,
I want to just touch on the question that you said about the voters' turnout. Those 30 or 40%, I mean, first of all, I have to say, our majority government right now is sitting there for the last 2 years or 3 years based on the 18% of the eligible voters in Canada.
could you explain that?
Okay. What is happening is, after the end of the election in 2011, or any other election for that matter, these 3 or 4 mainstream party comes and say we got 33%, 39%, 42% of the votes. But what they don't say is it is 39 or 40% of the people who voted.
Okay, so, well, let's say that we create an imaginary riding.
Yes.
And there are 100 people eligible to vote in that riding.
Okay.
100 people only. Now, what I'd like you to do is take us through the numbers.
Okay. Out of 100 people, 18 people voted for the Conservative Party, and other 12 people voted for the rest of the 3 other parties.
Okay, so to be clear, 30 out of 100 people are actually voting, is that what you're saying?
No, 30 out of the people voted for people who are sitting in the parliament who makes the decision. Those who voted for the same party or same candidate from the same party who were not elected really doesn't make any decision for us.
Okay, help me, I want to back up and I want to go
Yes.
slowly through the numbers. Now, because, you know, I hear this all the time and I hear different numbers, and I think that people watching would find this enormously interesting. So I'm going to ask you a short question. I'm going to ask you to give me a short answer, okay? Now, we're going to hypothesize a riding. We'll call it Toronto Centre, okay? And let's imagine that there are 100 people eligible to vote, okay? Now, the first question I want to ask you is, of that 100, based on past turnout, how many of them would you expect to vote?
To vote this time for this by-election?
Cast a ballot.
Maximum 40 to 42.
All right, let's work with 40.
Okay.
So we have 100, and we have 40 people actually go out and vote.
Yes.
Now what I'd like you to do is give us some numbers that would result in a majority government for the Conservatives.
If you get 21.
All right. So we have, let's actually buy into the media view of the world for a moment and assume there are only four political parties. So we have the Conservatives, we have the Liberals, we have the NDP, and we have the Greens. Now, what you're saying is that if 21 vote for the Conservatives, that is 21 out of the 40.
That won't
Yes.
happen in Toronto Centre, of course, thank goodness.
Well, as I say, it's a hypothetical riding,
Right.
and you never know. But go ahead.
I think we do know.
As a matter of fact, now that we have 4.
Let's continue. So 21 vote for the Conservatives. We have to make up 19.
Well,
Give me some numbers.
No, I am going to give you better numbers. Now we
No,
have.
let's work with these
No,
numbers.
we don't have to go to 21. Now we can go to 12. If you give 12 people vote for Conservative, let's say based on your hypothetical situation, you have another 28. And if you give, let's say, 8 or 9 to any one of the other parties,
9, 9, and 10.
yes, so that means the majority voted in by 12% of the population.
Okay, so following this through, all right, so what Bauman is saying is that if we have 40 out of 100 voting, which means, by the way, that 60% of them stay home
Yes.
because they don't care and they don't think it makes a difference. Now, next, we're now looking at how the 40 votes are dispersed, and what Bauman is hypothesizing is that the conservatives get 12 votes,
If they get 12 votes, yes.
the Liberals get 9, the NDP get 9, and the Greens get 9. Now, the conservative candidate would win, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
First past the post.
Okay, so the conservative candidate wins, okay, and that's only 40% of the vote.
Yes.
Okay, so that is actually,
But what they can claim, they divide 12 to the 40, and then the percentage goes higher.
okay, so let's look at it both ways. Let's look at it as a percentage of the actual vote, and then let's look at it as a percentage of the potential vote. If it's a percentage of the potential vote, and this is absolutely extraordinary, it means that under this scenario, one could have a conservative government with 12%
That's
of
correct.
the eligible voters. If we look at the actual voters, 12 over 40 is slightly less than a third.
30%.
30%, okay, so, yeah, well, that's right, because 40 times 2.5 is 100, 12 times 2.5 is 30, so you've hypothesized a situation here where one could have a majority government in Canada with 30% of the actual vote or 12% of the eligible vote.
And the reality is not far away from that, as Bauman
No,
pointed out.
and the reality actually is 18%.
And the reality based on what's actually happened is
Based on
18%.
the number of the parliament, if you add all of the votes that was casted for the member of the parliament sitting in the parliament right now, add it together and divided by 24.25 million eligible voters, you're just looking at 18%.
Remarkable, remarkable. And then, of course, let's ask ourselves, I mean, how are decisions made in this government? And, you know, one of the themes we've been talking about tonight is, I think to put it fairly objectively, although I don't mean to be cruel, the utter irrelevance of the actual MPs. So if the government is run primarily out of the Prime Minister's office, or out of the cabinet, I mean, that's absolutely extraordinary. That's absolutely extraordinary.
That means they don't need any much more mandate than 18% to run the government for 4 years and do whatever they want to do. And that is why, not why, but one of the main reasons that we have this voters' apathy, because they feel they have no power. And I want to emphasize on this matter. If that 60% choose to vote tomorrow, they have tremendous power. Because if that 60% decide to vote to anyone but mainstream parties, all of those numbers that we put for your example completely be out of the whack.
So, I mean, wouldn't it seems to me fairly obvious then that in fact, rather than looking to governments to do something about improving the situation of certain voters in Toronto Centre or elsewhere, I mean, isn't an obvious solution to just energize them and get them out there voting and, you know, taking some control over this situation? What do you think, Dorian?
Well, I think that, you know, certainly what Bauman has pointed out is a clear problem for the health of the democratic process. And I think you're right. We've got to somehow get it out to people, the importance of having their input into who runs this country. I would venture to say to those that are listening, and of course, I think one has to avoid preaching to the choir, because many, many people that are listening, that have tuned in, are people that are concerned and are politically tuned into this. But what I would say is, you know, let's try and get our friends and our relatives clued in to the fact that if we want the Canada that was in fact intended to be, a Canada that is tolerant, a Canada that is caring, a Canada that looks after the environment. I mean, I have to tell you, I have never been more ashamed as a Canadian than I am under the Harper regime that has taken no leadership whatsoever with regard to the environment. In fact, has gone in the reverse. I still am a firm proponent of the Kyoto Accord. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous for us to allow Stephen Harper to literally, in a very real way, destroy all of the protective measures of preceding governments over our waters, our rivers, and our waterways, over the fishing of this great land of ours, and allowing so much of our country to be sold off to China. China now owns a segment of Canada that is actually larger than all of Prince Edward Island. And how many people really understood that? One of the things I'm going to say in defense of the Senate is the fact that if it is run properly, and you know, the Progressive Conservative Party, the forerunners of the Progressive Canadian Party, clearly endorse the Senate as it was intended to be. It is a sober second thought. We cannot do without it. It is an amazing institution if it is allowed to run properly. But at the present time, when you look at Stephen Harper, who ran on his absolute commitment to abolish the Senate, and what does he do? He ends up appointing the largest number of nepotistic appointments, if you like. 59 of the current senators were appointed by the Harper regime. And of course, we look at what is happening there today. But, you know, back to that whole issue of, you know, where we have to take responsibility as Canadians for what we have allowed to happen to this nation. I would venture to say, just as Sir John A. Macdonald is the father of Confederation, Stephen Harper is speeding his way to being the father of deconfederation. If we allow another conservative government, we might as well kiss the Canada we love and know goodbye. We need all hands on deck. We need all Canadians that really care about this nation to rally and to literally take the words of our national anthem seriously and to stand on guard for this nation. And how do they do it? Back full circle. Please get out and vote, not just in this by-election, but get ready for the big one that is coming in 2015.
In all of my literature, I have not asked people to vote for me. I asked them to participate.
Yes, yes.
And that is all I ask. Two things I ask the residents of not only Toronto Centre, every Canadian who is eligible to vote. One, participate, and second, refrain from voting for the mainstream parties, to show them that the power still is in your hand.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
You are the one who can change them. Is not, at least provide some sort of a scare tactic so they know people are watching you. If you sit at your home, if you don't want to, let me put it this way. By going out of your home for 15 minutes or 20 minutes to cast your vote, believe me, the next morning at least you can watch yourself in the mirror and say, you did what you could. If you don't do that, none of your complaints will be heard by anyone in Ottawa.
Well, I'm not even sure it's a question of complaining. I think, as you point out, it's largely a question of participation. I mean, perhaps there should be, you know, an obligation of citizenship to participate in some way or another. But Dorian, you know, you raise an interesting point about selling the Canadian resources. And I want to, and I think that's interesting, partly because it's interesting in its own right, but I do not recall any discussion of that whatsoever in these debates. And it seems to me that eventually the selling of resources would be sure to become an issue of Canadian sovereignty.
Totally.
And I think there are other areas where Canada's sovereignty is perhaps not being well protected by the current government.
That's correct. That's correct. I think that there is also almost an ignoring of the issue that has now, in my view, is now rivaling the War of 1812, and that is the FATCA issue, which is, of course, the foreign accounts.
Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act. That's a Canadian law, is it?
Well, it's actually a law that is being imposed upon Canada from the IRS in the United States of Canada, and it is clearly a violation of Canadian sovereignty, because they are ordering our banks, and this will shock anybody that has anything to do with a relative who may have dual citizenship. Or even, for example, my understanding is that the Liberal candidate gave birth to a child in the United States.
She actually said that at
Yes,
the
and so
Rosedale debate.
I'm not sure whether she's aware.
Making the child a U.S. citizen.
Exactly. And, people don't realize this, but the U.S. is aggressively trying to find ways to mitigate the nearly $18 trillion of debt, much of it held by China. And so what they're doing is they're coming to Canada, and then Canada will be the gateway country for this, and they're telling Canada and to the Canadian government, you have to get your bankers to divulge information, which is totally violating the Charter of Rights, violating Canadian sovereignty, and they're ordering the Canadian government to pass this FATCA, I guess what you would call law, in order to be able to get money from those Canadian citizens who have a connection to the United States by birth or by a relative. And this, to me, is really troubling, because we've got Mr. Flaherty and the Prime Minister behind closed doors who are now teetering and are ready to sign this. And this affects Canadian sovereignty on a level that supersedes how it would be affected had we lost the War of 1812.
Bob, and your thoughts on the FATCA issue?
Well, FATCA by itself is troubling, not only because of those Canadian citizens who have some sort of the connection to United States, but also for the rest of Canadians, because every regulation that this government brings upon people always carries some other heavier issue on its back. For instance, just a couple of days ago, they introduced a cyberbullying act, and all of a sudden, they introduced a bill with 65 pages. I didn't know one bill takes 65 pages. I am pretty sure a bill can be introduced within 2 pages, 3 pages, or maximum 5 pages.
Yeah, but then somebody might read it.
Well, that is the different story. You have to talk to NDP and the Liberals that they vote without reading. And the problem with the FATCA is when it goes, it's included in the intergovernmental agreement, and we don't know what else is in that intergovernmental agreement. And as Dorian mentioned about the regulation of the Canadian bank, the moment you pass a regulation like a change in the Bank Act or something like that, it will automatically affect every Canadian. It's not just those who were born there, or, for instance, if the bank asks for the place of birth or some other private information to find out if you are American or not, it affects the rest of Canadians as well. Tomorrow, maybe they ask you, okay, where you were born? I was born in Iraq. Oh, now we have another agreement as part of the intergovernmental agreement with Iraq. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. I think it becomes, as Barman pointed out, John, it becomes a slippery slope. And
I wonder about tying that to natural resources. I mean, if the U.S. can come to Canada and essentially put the banks under their jurisdiction, the Canadian banks, what about water? What about electricity?
Oh, absolutely.
What about lumber?
Absolutely, yeah.
As a matter of fact, I watched a movie, although movies are usually fiction, but in this particular case, it was very close to the reality of the water, the issue of the waters or Canadian pure water, and that called H2O. I think Paul Gross played a major role. For instance, for oil sand, for every barrel of oil sand, I believe they have to spend 3 or 4 barrels of the fresh water to extract it off the ground. So they are wasting the fresh water to get oil out.
I've heard that. I've heard that remarkable number too.
Because
in fact, it's so remarkable, I find it hard to believe it's really true. But I defer to your information.
In fact, CBC had a documentary just last year showing those small towns in northern Alberta, which their doctors were talking about the deformation of even fish in their water, increase of the cancer cases among native people, and all because of the pollution as a result of extracting oil sand to send it either to China or United States.
Big issues, yet never discussed at all in this election. I'm sure that some of the mainstream party candidates would say, well, you know, this doesn't affect Toronto Centre directly, but you know, certainly you know, as they point out, that there's nothing about this election that affects much anyway in terms of what happens in Parliament. Perhaps a good opportunity to, in fact, discuss these things.
I think I would just, you know, reiterate what you said, though, John, earlier, and it ties into what Barman has said. What I'm trying to say is that for the constituents of Toronto Centre, if you really do want a voice that will take care of your needs and your concerns, it would be very, very advisable to vote for Dorian Baxter, the Progressive Canadian Party, or for Barman, because we are individuals who will be paying very careful attention to how we can serve you individually and collectively. And believe me, our voices, I've known Barman for some years, I respect him greatly, and I'll be candid with you, our voices will be heard a lot more loudly than the voices of those who are towing the party line. But again, in keeping with what Barman said, I know we're getting close to concluding our discussion. It's been more of a discussion than a debate, but I think that I would say this. Barman is 100% right. Please, whatever you do, those that are from the Toronto Centre that may be tuned in or will be tuning into YouTube later, please get out and vote and get as many people out as possible. Unlike Barman, when I knock on doors, I don't just say get out and vote. I say vote for Dorian Baxter, the Progressive Canadian candidate, and I will be a voice that Ottawa will hear on your behalf.
Well, that sounds like almost a closing statement from Dorian. So, Bauman, I think that you should...
My closing statement is very clear. Especially in Toronto Centre, almost 50% of you were born outside of Canada. You abandoned your family, you lost your credentials, you traveled miles, thousands of miles away, only in hope of better life, at least for yourself or at least for your children. Your job is not finished yet. My suggestion is take advantage of your new home and participate in the process of the democracy to at least map the future of your own children and the children of your children. By sitting home and not voting, you are not doing any favor to your children or their future. Please participate and vote.
Hear, hear.
Well, that was tremendous, and I would close by saying that I'm very, very proud to have had the opportunity to talk with the two of you before this election. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to ThatChannel for organizing this. Good night.
Thank you very much. Good night.